Hi, I'm Dr. Russ, and this is Unit 8. What is a paragraph? In Unit 7, you wrote the outline for your paper, which concludes the pre-writing stage. Now we're going to take a little bit of time just to review what's involved in writing a paragraph, because starting in Unit 9, you're going to write a paragraph, and you're going to be writing paragraphs for the next 3 units. So let's just make sure we get it right. Okay, let's get started. So in this video, start out by talking about what makes a good paragraph. And then we'll go through a 6-step process for writing a paragraph, and then we'll talk about the assignment. So the goal for this unit is that on your own, you will be able to craft a clear and coherent paragraph that supports a central idea. So what makes a good paragraph? A good paragraph is unified, coherent, and relevant. Unified means that all sentences in the paragraph relate to one central point or idea expressed in the topic sentence. Coherent means that all sentences are logically organized and clearly connected. And relevant means that the paragraph supports the overall theme and purpose of the paper. So how do we write a paragraph? First, we identify the paragraph's purpose. We show why the paragraph is relevant. We give evidence. We explain or interpret the evidence. We conclude the paragraph. And then we read through the whole paragraph to make sure that it makes sense. So we're going to go through each of these steps. And each time we do, we'll also have an example about the history of the Braille reading system that we can look at. But first, let's make sure that we understand a few academic writing terms because we're going to use them a lot in this discussion of paragraphs. A claim. A claim is something that you expect your readers to accept as true. So an example of a claim is Liberian peppers are hot. Evidence is statements that support a claim. Basically, evidence answers questions that the reader might have, like, how do you know? Why should I believe you? What is an example of that? So an example of evidence that supports our claim that Liberian peppers are hot is when people eat a Liberian pepper for the first time, they often need water. So that evidence basically says, prove to me that Liberian peppers are hot. Another term that we're going to use in this discussion is analysis. Analysis is trying to understand something complicated by breaking it into parts and trying to understand each part, including how the pieces relate to each other and to the whole. So what we just said is actually an example of analysis. Analysis is kind of a complicated idea. And we broke it down into pieces and put each piece in a separate line on this slide to help understand it better. So here's an example of analysis. A horse has long legs and strong muscles in its body. It has almost no fat. This allows the horse to run very fast. So we've taken the idea of a horse and broken it down into smaller parts about the horse so that we can understand it better. So the first step in writing a paragraph is to identify the paragraph's purpose. And we do that by writing the topic sentence. A topic sentence answers the question, what is the central idea that will organize this paragraph? It sums up the main point and introduces the paragraph's focus. And remember that we did outlines? A well-written outline will tell you. You can go right to the outline. And if it's a sentence outline, that sentence may even be good to use for the topic sentence as it is. Or maybe you will need to change it a little bit. A topic sentence should be specific enough to cover in a single paragraph, but yet general enough that you can develop it over several sentences. So let's look at an example of a topic sentence. Although the Braille system gained immediate popularity with the blind students at the Institute in Paris, it had to gain acceptance among the sighted before its adoption throughout France. Why is that a good topic sentence? First of all, it transitions from the previous paragraph, which we don't see here, but that previous paragraph discussed the invention of Braille. It clearly identifies the focus of this paragraph, which is what? The acceptance of Braille by sighted people. It relates to the paper's overall thesis about the adoption of Braille as a written language for blind people. And it leaves space for evidence and analysis. Next, we should show why the paragraph is relevant. Ask yourself the question, why does the topic sentence matter for your overall argument in the paper? If that answer is not already clear from the topic sentence, you may need to explain and expand on the meaning of the topic sentence in the paragraph first. So let's look at an example. This support was necessary because sighted teachers and leaders had ultimate control over the propagation of Braille resources. The supporting sentence expands on the topic, and it shows how it fits into the broader argument about the social acceptance of Braille. Now it's time to support your point by giving evidence and examples. Evidence is not just facts, however, it's more than that. Here's some common types of evidence. Remember, evidence asks, how do you know that? Quotations from literary texts, interviews, and other primary sources. And that you get that from looking at your outline and going back to your annotated bibliography. Summaries, paraphrases, or quotations of secondary sources that provide information or interpretation in support of your point. So again, you go back to your outline in your annotated bibliography to get that information. Qualitative or quantitative data that you have gathered or found in existing research. And descriptive examples of artistic or musical works, events, or firsthand experiences. So let's look at an example of evidence. Many teachers at the Royal Institute for Blind Youth resisted Braille's system because they found the tactile method of reaching difficult to learn. Block and Galst, 2009. Why is this good? It cites specific evidence from a secondary source, that is Block and Galst, demonstrating cited people's reluctance to accept Braille. And note that we cited that secondary source the right way according to APA style. So this was one of those cases where we went back, our annotated bibliography, looked at it, and found information from it to include in our paper. Explain or interpret the evidence. So now show the reader how this evidence adds to your point. If you quoted a passage, give your interpretation of the quotation. If you cited a statistic, tell the reader what it implies in your argument. And if you refer to information from a secondary source, show how it develops the idea of the paragraph. So now let's look at an example of explaining or interpreting. This resistance was symptomatic of the prevalent attitude that the blind population had to adapt to the sighted world rather than develop their own tools and methods. So this one is an interpretation. The sentence is good because it adds detail and interpretation to the evidence, arguing that this fact reveals something more general about the social attitudes at the time. Now, those steps 3 and 4, you can repeat those several times. Let's go back. Step 3 is giving evidence. Step 4 is explaining or interpreting the evidence. So within a paragraph, you can do those 2 steps several times until your point is fully developed. Use transition words and phrases between these ideas to show the connections between different sentences in the paragraph. Here's an example of where steps 3 and 4 were repeated. Over time, however, with the increasing impetus to make social contribution possible for all, teachers began to appreciate the usefulness of Braille's system. Bullock and Galst, 2009. Access to reading could help improve the productivity and integration of people with vision loss. So in this paragraph, there was both evidence to tell us about the changing attitude to Braille among the sighted and interpretation, which argues for why this change occurred as part of the broader social shifts. Finally, conclude the paragraph. Return to your main point and show the overall consequences of the evidence you have explored. Consequences answer the so what question. In other words, if everything in this paragraph is true, then what? So here's an example of a conclusion. It took approximately 30 years, but the French government eventually approved the Braille system, and it was established throughout the country. Bullock and Galst, 2009. Why is this a good conclusion? It takes the form of a historical story. It gives evidence and analysis of each step toward Braille's widespread acceptance. The final sentence ends the story with the consequences of those events. So the question is, so what? And the answer is, Braille became widely accepted. Now that the paragraph is written, read through the paragraph to make sure that each sentence follows smoothly and logically from the last and adds up to a coherent whole. So here on the left is an example of the whole paragraph put together. I'm not going to read clear through it, but that's what we would do at this point. So note that this is just an example and not all paragraphs will look exactly like this. When you're writing, you may choose to include different examples that have one key point in common. Or you could include just one key piece of evidence, such as a quotation or statistic, and then analyze it in depth over several sentences. Or you could break down a concept or category into various parts to help the reader understand it. So the introduction and conclusion paragraphs will also look different. Let's look at this week's assignment. You're going to demonstrate that given a topic or a thesis statement and a set of facts, draft a clear and coherent paragraph that supports the thesis statement. So this is going to be a directive assignment. We're not going to write what you've been working on for your paper all along. We're going to take a week off from that and write about something different. Before we get into the assignment, let me define a term real quick so we all understand what we're talking about. And that term is skill. A skill is the ability coming from one's knowledge, practice, aptitude, etc., to do something well. A skill is something you can do. Two examples of skills are dribbling a football and making GB. This is important. A skill is not something that you know. Examples of knowledge are being able to name the first president of Liberia or tell how many Liberian dollars there are in a US dollar. So the first part of this assignment involves thinking. Think about the things you've done over the past 3 years. What is a new skill that you learned? Remember our definition of skill. It's something that you can do. Then complete the following sentence. I learned how to, whatever. So we know that a paragraph is about a topic. Let's write the topic for this paragraph. In this case, we're giving the topic to you for this week. It's learning a new skill. So when we write about that, we could say, the topic of my paragraph is learning a new skill. Or we could say, my paragraph is about learning a new skill. Notice that the topic for your paragraph is general. Often, when you have a writing assignment, your instructor tells you what the topic is, and that's true in this case. But sometimes you get to choose a topic on your own. Next, write the topic sentence for your paragraph and make it interesting for your reader. Here's some examples. Learning to make GB is harder than I thought. Last week, I learned how to dribble a football. My favorite memory of my brother is the time he taught me how to drive a motorcycle. The topic was general, but the topic sentence is specific. The topic sentence narrows down the general sentence to a specific situation that you're going to write about. So in your paragraph, describe your experience learning the new skill by answering these questions. 1, what were the steps you followed? For example, First, I made the soup and then I made the dough. 2, how did you feel as you were learning the new skill? Were you happy, excited, afraid, something else? 3, how do you feel about practicing the skill on your own? Confident, doubtful, something else? So your paragraph should answer all 3 of those questions. Be sure to answer all of the questions and write 2 or 3 sentences to answer each question. You do not have to answer the questions in the order shown. Answer them in an order that makes the paragraph interesting for the reader. The paragraph should be 1/2 to 3/4 of a page long when typed single space. So we're not writing a whole academic paper. There's no introduction, body, or conclusion. There's just one paragraph. So how will we evaluate those paragraphs? First of all, it has to have an identifiable topic sentence that states the central idea of the paragraph. Then all sentences must relate to that central point or idea. Sentences must be logically organized and clearly connected. The paragraph also has sentences that give examples or evidence to support the topic sentence. And the paragraph has sentences that explain or interpret the evidence. And the paragraph has a concluding sentence that either summarizes the paragraph or states its consequences or transitions to the next paragraph. It has to have no spelling errors and at most 1 to 2 grammar errors. And as always, it must be submitted by the due date. So everything that you're being evaluated on is things we learned in this video. If you have any questions, be sure to ask your instructor or your lab assistant.